She was 6 years old when she vanished. 23 years later, she picked up a phone and spoke 7 words that would shatter everything she believed about herself. I think I might be Lily Moore. In 1991, a little girl disappeared on her walk home from school in a quiet Georgia town. No ransom note, no witnesses, no trace. For over 2 decades, her family existed in a state of suspended grief, never knowing whether their daughter was alive or gone forever. What they could never have imagined was that hundreds of miles away, their daughter was breathing, growing, living an entire life under a stolen name, with absolutely no memory of the family who never stopped searching for her. This is the story of how a case that haunted investigators for more than 2 decades was finally cracked open by a deathbed confession. A single internet search and the persistence of those who refused to let a little girl be forgotten. This is the case of Lily Moore. And I promise you, you have never heard anything quite like it. Before we go any further, drop a comment below and tell me where you are watching from today. We have viewers from all over the world, and I genuinely love hearing from each of you. If this is your first time here on Dark Crime Uncovered, hit that subscribe button and tap the notification bell so you never miss a case. And if you are already part of the family, thank you for being here. Now, let us get into it. The spring of 1991 arrived in Valdosta, Georgia, with the kind of warmth that makes children restless and parents grateful for longer evenings. This was a different era. No smartphones in every pocket, no GPS tracking, no amber alerts flashing across highway signs. In small southern towns like Valdosta, life moved at a gentler pace. Neighbors knew each other by name. Children rode bikes until the streetlights flickered on. Front doors stayed unlocked because the greatest danger most parents worried about was scraped knees or coming home late for supper. It was the kind of place where everyone looked out for everyone else's children, where community was not just an ideal, but a living, breathing reality. Lily Moore was 6 years old that spring. A bright-eyed first grader with blonde pigtails that bounced when she ran and a gap-toothed smile that could light up any room she walked into. She was the younger of 2 children born to David and Sarah Moore, a working-class couple who had built their life in Valdosta with modest means but boundless love. David worked at the local hardware store, putting in 6 days a week, but making it home for dinner most nights. Sarah worked part-time as a receptionist at a dental office, a job that gave her the flexibility to handle school pickups and after-school activities. Their older son, Marcus, was 9 and had recently discovered a passion for baseball, spending every spare moment at the local diamond, practicing his swing. The Moore family lived in a modest ranch-style house on Magnolia Street, a quiet residential area where children rode bikes on the sidewalks and families gathered for weekend barbecues. Their home was small but immaculate. Sarah planted azaleas in the front yard every spring. David had assembled the backyard swing set himself the previous Christmas. The refrigerator was covered in crayon drawings and school photos held up by magnets, and the walls displayed ceramic figurines Sarah had inherited from her grandmother. Lily was the kind of child teachers loved. Her first-grade teacher, Mrs. Patterson, would later tell investigators that Lily was eager to please, always the first to raise her hand, always volunteering to pass out papers or help clean the chalkboard. She had a small circle of close friends at school. Her favorite game at recess was pretending to run a restaurant, taking orders from friends and serving imaginary meals made of sand and leaves. She loved to draw, filling page after page with pictures of her family, their dog Rusty, and elaborate scenes of princesses in castles that existed only in her imagination. At home, Lily was chatty and affectionate. She followed her mother around the house asking endless questions about everything from why the sky was blue to where babies came from. She adored her older brother despite the typical sibling squabbles over television programs and who got to sit in the front seat. In the evenings, after dinner was cleared and dishes were washed, the family would gather in the living room to watch sitcoms or game shows. Lily curled up next to her mother on the couch, already in her pajamas, fighting to stay awake until bedtime. The Moore family was not wealthy, but they were happy. They took modest holidays to nearby beaches, celebrated birthdays with homemade cakes, and attended the local Methodist church most Sundays. David coached Marcus's Little League team. Sarah volunteered at the elementary school library once a week. They were the kind of family that embodied the American dream in its simplest, most authentic form. They worked hard, loved deeply, and believed that, as long as they had each other, they had everything they needed. And then came April the 17th, 1991. The day everything changed. That Wednesday started like any other. Sarah woke the children at 6:30, made breakfast while they got dressed, and drove them to school in the family's aging station wagon. David had already left for work, his lunch packed in a brown paper bag, his thermos filled with coffee. The morning routine was so familiar it had become almost ritualistic. Sarah would park in the drop-off lane, kiss both children goodbye, and watch them walk through the school's front doors before driving away. That morning, Lily had been particularly chatty, excited about an art project they were starting that day. She told her mother all about how they were going to make collages out of magazine cutouts, and she had already decided she was going to make hers about animals. The school day passed without incident. Lily worked on her collage, cutting out pictures of puppies and kittens with blunt-tipped scissors, carefully gluing them onto construction paper. During recess, she played on the swings with her best friend Amy, both girls competing to see who could swing the highest. At lunch, she ate the peanut butter and jelly sandwich her mother had packed, trading her apple slices for Amy's chocolate chip biscuits. Mrs. Patterson would later recall that Lily had seemed perfectly normal that day. Happy, engaged. No signs of distress or unusual behavior. School let out at 3 o'clock. Most days, Sarah would pick up both children. But on Wednesdays, Marcus had baseball practice that ran until 5. So Sarah had arranged for Lily to walk the 4 blocks home with a neighbor girl, Emma Harris, who was in 3rd grade. Emma's mother, Patricia Harris, would watch both girls at her house until Sarah got off work at 4:30. It was a system that had worked smoothly for months, a testament to the trust and cooperation that defined their community. But on that particular Wednesday, something went terribly wrong. Emma Harris left school at the usual time, but Lily was not with her. Mrs. Patterson, who monitored dismissal, would later tell police that she had seen Lily walk out of the building with the other children. Several students reported seeing Lily on the front steps of the school, but somewhere between the school building and the Harris house 4 blocks away, Lily Moore vanished into thin air. Patricia Harris first noticed something was wrong around 3:20 when Emma arrived home alone. "Where is Lily?" she had asked her daughter. Emma responded with confusion. She said she had looked for Lily after school, but could not find her. She had assumed Lily had already left, or that maybe her mother had picked her up early. Patricia felt a flutter of concern, but tried to rationalize it. Maybe Sarah had indeed picked Lily up. Maybe there had been a change in plans. She called the Moore house and got no answer. She called Sarah's work and was told Sarah had left to pick up Marcus. Growing increasingly anxious, Patricia finally called David at the hardware store. "David, is Lily with you?" she had asked, trying to keep her voice calm. The silence on the other end of the line lasted only seconds, but felt like an eternity. "No," David said slowly. "She is supposed to be at your house with Emma." That was the moment the first real spike of fear pierced through both adults. David immediately left work. Patricia called Sarah's dental office again, leaving an urgent message. By 3:45, both David and Sarah had arrived at the Harris house, their faces pale, their voices tight with barely controlled panic. "Maybe she went straight home," Sarah said, grasping at the possibility like a lifeline. They rushed back to their house, bursting through the front door, calling Lily's name. The house was empty and silent. They checked every room, every closet, even places too small for a child to hide. David ran outside to check the backyard, the garage, the storage shed. Nothing. Sarah called every friend Lily had, every mother whose phone number she could find in her address book. No one had seen her. No one knew where she was. At 4:15, David dialed emergency services. His hands were shaking so badly, he misdialed twice before getting it right. "My daughter is missing," David said, his voice cracking. "She never came home from school. No one knows where she is." The search for Lily Moore had begun. Within minutes, patrol cars were dispatched to the Moore residence. Officer Thomas Bradley arrived first, pulling up to the house at 27 minutes past 4. He found David and Sarah on the front porch, both looking shell-shocked and terrified. Bradley, a father himself, felt his stomach clench. He had been a police officer for 12 years and had handled missing child calls before, but most of them resolved quickly. Children got distracted, went to a friend's house without telling their parents, lost track of time playing. But something about the look in these parents' eyes, the way Sarah kept wrapping her arms around herself as if trying to hold herself together, told him this might be different. More officers arrived. The small house on Magnolia Street suddenly filled with uniforms and radios crackling with static. Sergeant Diana Moss, who would become the lead investigator on the case, arrived at 5:10 and immediately began organizing a systematic search. She dispatched officers to canvass the route between the school and the Moore house, going door to door, asking residents if they had seen anything unusual. Other officers were sent to search nearby parks, wooded areas, drainage ditches, anywhere a small child might have wandered or become injured. By 5 o'clock, more than 20 officers were involved in the search. Neighbors began to hear what was happening and emerged from their houses to help. Word spread quickly through the small community. A child was missing. Lily Moore, the sweet little girl with the blonde pigtails, had not come home from school. Within an hour, volunteers began arriving at the Moore house, asking what they could do. A canine unit arrived from a nearby county. German shepherds trained in search and rescue were given articles of Lily's clothing to scent, and then they were released to track. The dogs led their handlers along the route from school toward the Moore house. But then the trail seemed to go cold near a small park about 2 blocks from school. The dogs circled, confused, unable to pick up a clear direction. This troubled the handlers. It suggested that Lily might have gotten into a vehicle at that location. The thought was too horrible for Sarah to contemplate. She had been holding herself together through sheer force of will. But as the hours passed and the searches yielded nothing, she felt herself beginning to fracture. David tried to stay strong for her, but he was barely holding on himself. They clung to each other in their living room, surrounded by investigators and volunteers, feeling utterly helpless. The worst part was not knowing if Lily was hurt, if she was scared, if she needed them. The not knowing was its own special kind of torture. By 10 o'clock that night, more than 100 people were involved in the search. The local volunteer fire department had mobilized. Churches had organized prayer groups that doubled as search parties. The story had been picked up by news stations in Atlanta and Jacksonville, expanding the reach of Lily's photo and description. One witness, an elderly woman named Mrs. Dorothy Fletcher, who lived across from the park and spent most afternoons sitting on her porch, provided what seemed like crucial information. She told investigators that she had been on her porch on Wednesday afternoon around 3:15. She remembered seeing several children walking home from school, which was common at that time. But she also remembered seeing a car parked near the entrance to the park, its engine running. She could not describe the car in detail, just that it was dark-colored, maybe blue or black, a saloon of some kind. Had there been anyone in the car? Mrs. Fletcher closed her eyes, trying to remember. She thought there had been someone in the driver's seat, but she could not say for certain. Male or female, she did not know. She had not really looked closely. She had gone inside to start dinner and had not looked out again. This information, vague as it was, gave investigators something concrete to work with. The working theory began to solidify. Someone had been waiting near that park, watching for an opportunity. When Lily had walked by alone, or perhaps had stopped at the park briefly, she had been taken. It would have required only moments. A car pulls up. Someone calls to the child, maybe pretends to know her, or claims to have been sent by her parents, and the child gets in. Either way, if this theory was correct, Lily could be anywhere by now. The FBI set up roadblocks on major highways leading out of Valdosta, stopping vehicles and asking drivers if they had seen anything unusual on Wednesday afternoon. Toll booth operators across the region were given Lily's photo and asked to be on alert. Truck stops, rest areas, and petrol stations for 100 miles in every direction were visited by investigators showing Lily's picture and asking questions. Sarah appeared at a press conference on Thursday afternoon, flanked by investigators with David standing just behind her, his hand on her shoulder. She had barely slept in 36 hours and looked haggard, her eyes red-rimmed and shadowed. But she forced herself to look into the cameras and speak directly to whoever might have taken her daughter. "Please," she said, her voice breaking, "please bring Lily home. She is just a little girl. She needs her family. She needs her mother. If you have her, please, I am begging you, let her go somewhere safe. Drop her off at a police station, a hospital, anywhere. Just please let her come home." Sarah's composure crumbled as she spoke the last words, and she had to be led away from the microphones as she dissolved into tears. The image of a mother's anguish was broadcast across the nation, and the story of Lily Moore became a national headline. Tips flooded in from across the country. Someone in Alabama thought they had seen a girl matching Lily's description at a shopping center. Someone in Florida called to report a suspicious man traveling with a young blonde girl. Each lead was followed. Each turned out to be nothing. 30 days after Lily's disappearance, a massive search was organized involving nearly 1,000 volunteers. It was called the Bring Lily Home Search. They spread out in organized grids, walking shoulder to shoulder through fields and forests, looking for any sign of Lily or her belongings. The search lasted 3 days and turned up nothing. The failure of this massive search effort marked a turning point in the case. While investigators continued to follow leads and the case remained officially active, the intensity began to wane. Volunteers who had been searching daily had to return to their normal lives. Media coverage became less frequent. The case began its slow, agonizing slide toward becoming a cold case. One of those heartbreaking mysteries that occasionally gets revisited in anniversary stories, but never truly resolved. The Moore family learned to live with their grief in the way that people learn to live with chronic pain. It never went away, but they developed coping mechanisms. They attended a support group for families of missing children, finding some solace in connecting with others who understood their unique suffering. They advocated for better systems to help find missing children, working with legislators to improve alert systems and tracking methods. Marcus grew older, moving from primary school to secondary school to university. He rarely talked about Lily with friends, but she was always there in his mind, a ghost who had shaped his entire life. He sometimes wondered what she would be like now if she had come home. Would they be close? Would she ask him for advice about school? The questions haunted him because they could never be answered. Sarah and David's marriage survived, though it was tested in ways they never could have imagined. Grief affected them differently. Sarah needed to talk about Lily constantly, while David found it too painful and preferred silence. They went to counseling, both together and separately. Working through their pain and learning how to support each other even when their needs conflicted. By the 10th anniversary of Lily's disappearance, the case was unquestionably cold. Diana Moss had retired from the police force, though she still kept the case files in her home office, still occasionally pulled them out to review. The story would get a brief mention in local news each April, a reminder of the unsolved mystery. But, for the most part, the world had moved on. But while the public moved on, the Moore family remained frozen in that April afternoon, in 1991. They celebrated birthdays and holidays with a chair always left empty. They marked the passing years not just in the normal way, but also by how long Lily had been gone. 6 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20. Each milestone was agonizing. Lily would have been 16 now, learning to drive. She would have been 20, maybe in university. The life she should have lived existed only in their imaginations. What none of them knew, what no one investigating the case could have known, was that hundreds of miles away in a small town in North Carolina, a young woman was living a life built entirely on lies. She had been told her name was Emma Wilson. She had been told that her mother had passed away when she was very young. She had been told that her father, Robert Wilson, had raised her alone after that tragedy. She had been homeschooled for years, told that traditional school was not safe, that the outside world was dangerous. Robert had been loving but strict, controlling every aspect of her life with a mix of affection and fear-based manipulation. Emma, who was actually Lily Moore, had no memory of her life before North Carolina. She had been so young when she was taken that her earliest clear memories were of the small house she shared with the man she believed was her father. There had been fragments, dreamlike images that occasionally surfaced. A woman with kind eyes, a swing set in a backyard, a stuffed rabbit. But Robert had explained those as dreams or imagination, remnants of stories he had told her about her mother. Emma had accepted these explanations because she had had no reason not to. Robert was all she had ever known. Robert Wilson had never physically harmed her. He had taught her to read and write, had made sure she had food and shelter, had even shown her genuine affection at times. But he had also isolated her completely from the outside world. For the first several years after taking her, they had moved frequently, never staying in one place long enough for anyone to ask questions. He had kept her hidden, never let her interact with neighbors or other children. He had constructed an elaborate story about her deceased mother and their need to grieve privately, a story that discouraged anyone from getting too close. As Emma got older, Robert had allowed slightly more freedom, but always within carefully controlled parameters. She was allowed to go to the library, but always with him present. She could shop at grocery stores, but never alone. The few people who interacted with them saw what Robert wanted them to see. A devoted father raising his daughter in a protected environment, perhaps a bit overprotective, but clearly loving. Emma had never questioned her life because she had nothing to compare it to. Robert had convinced her that other children were at risk, that the world was full of dangers, that his strict rules were for her own protection. He had created a prison without bars, using fear and emotional manipulation instead of physical restraints. And it had worked for more than 2 decades. The first crack in this carefully constructed reality came when Emma turned 28. Robert had been diagnosed with early-onset Alzheimer's disease several years earlier, and his condition had been steadily declining. Emma, who by this point was his primary caretaker, noticed that he was becoming increasingly confused and agitated. He would forget conversations they had had hours before. He would call her by different names sometimes. And one afternoon in March of 2014, during a particularly difficult episode, he said something that made no sense at all. "I am sorry, Lily," he had mumbled, his eyes unfocused. "I never meant for it to go this way. I just wanted a daughter." Emma had frozen. "Who is Lily?" she had asked. Robert had looked at her in confusion, as if he did not recognize her. "You are," he had said. "You are Lily." Then, just as quickly, the moment passed. His expression cleared slightly, and he called her Emma again, asking what they were having for dinner. Emma had tried to brush it off as the disease talking, but the name stuck in her mind. Lily. Why had he called her that? The incident might have been forgotten if it had been an isolated occurrence. But over the following weeks, it happened again and again. In his confused state, Robert would sometimes call her Lily. He would sometimes reference things from a past she did not remember, talking about Georgia, about a school, about being afraid of getting caught. Most of the time, his ramblings were incoherent, the product of a mind deteriorating. But occasionally, there would be moments of terrible clarity when he would look at Emma with anguished recognition and say things like, "I am sorry I took you," or "Your real mother must have been so sad." Emma's world began to tilt on its axis. She began to search through Robert's belongings, looking for anything that might explain his strange comments. She found boxes of old documents in the attic, papers that Robert had always told her not to go through. There were legal documents, tax returns, old bank statements. But there was nothing about her birth. No birth certificate, no adoption papers, no records of a mother who had supposedly passed away when Emma was young. The absence of documentation that should have existed was as telling as finding evidence itself. She found old photographs of Robert at various ages, but none that showed him with a woman who could have been Emma's mother. There were no photos of Emma as an infant or toddler. The earliest photo of her was one Robert had taken when she appeared to be around 8 or 9, already living in North Carolina. It was as if her existence had begun in the middle, with no before. One afternoon, while Robert was napping, Emma turned to the internet, a resource she had been allowed to use only under Robert's supervision, and only for specific educational purposes. Now, alone with a laptop, she typed in the search term she had been building up courage to enter: missing girl named Lily. The results that came back were overwhelming. There were dozens of missing girls named Lily, or with Lily as part of their name. Emma scrolled through pages of results, looking at photos of missing children, reading snippets of their stories. Most of them had disappeared recently. Some had been found. Others remained missing. Then she saw it. A photo that made her heart stop. It was part of a cold case website, one of those sites dedicated to unsolved disappearances. The photo showed a little girl with blonde hair and pigtails smiling at the camera. The caption read, "Lily Moore, age 6, missing from Valdosta, Georgia since April the 17th, 1991. If you have any information, please contact the Georgia Bureau of Investigation." Emma stared at the photo for a long time. Something about the girl's eyes was familiar. She looked at the date. 1991. She did the maths quickly in her head. If Lily Moore had been 6 in 1991, she would be 29 now. Emma was 28. Or at least, that is what she had always believed. But what if Robert had lied about her age too? What if she was actually 29? With shaking hands, Emma clicked on the link to read more about the case. She read about the disappearance, about the massive search, about the family left behind. She read quotes from Lily's mother, Sarah Moore, begging for her daughter's return. She saw photos of the family, a father named David, a mother named Sarah, an older brother named Marcus. The article mentioned that Lily had been wearing a pink t-shirt with a rainbow when she disappeared. Emma had a sudden flash of memory, so vivid it felt like being struck by lightning. A pink shirt, a rainbow, the feeling of fabric against her skin. She continued digging, finding more articles about the case. There were photos of Valdosta, of the school Lily had attended, of the neighborhood where she had lived. None of it sparked clear memories, but there was a sense of recognition. Like déjà vu, but stronger. Emma found herself crying without quite understanding why. She felt a grief and loss that seemed out of proportion to reading about a stranger's tragedy. But was it a stranger, or was she looking at her own story, her own family, her own stolen life? For several days, Emma wrestled with what to do. Part of her wanted to call the police immediately, to report what she had found, to demand answers. But another part was terrified. What if she was wrong? What if this was all just a bizarre coincidence, and Robert really was her father? What if confronting this truth meant losing the only family and life she had ever known? The decision was ultimately made for her when Robert's condition deteriorated rapidly. He collapsed one morning and had to be rushed to the hospital. The doctor said he had had a stroke on top of the Alzheimer's, and his prognosis was poor. Emma sat by his hospital bed, watching the man she had called father her entire life fade away, and felt a confusing mix of love, anger, and desperate need for answers. "Who am I?" she whispered to him when the nurses had left them alone. "Please, just tell me the truth. Am I Lily Moore?" Robert's eyes opened slightly. His hand, weak and trembling, reached for hers. "Yes," he whispered, the word barely audible. "I am sorry. I took you. I just wanted a family. I never meant—" He trailed off, exhausted by the effort of speaking. Emma felt the world spin around her. Confirmation. The truth she had suspected, but had been too afraid to fully believe. She was Lily Moore. She had been stolen from her family 23 years ago. Everything she had believed about herself was a lie. "Why?" she managed to ask, tears streaming down her face. But Robert had drifted away again, unable or unwilling to provide more explanation. When the nurses came back in, Emma stepped out into the hallway and made the call. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold the phone. "My name is Emma Wilson," she said. "At least, that is the name I have been using. But I think I might be Lily Moore. I think I was taken 23 years ago." Within an hour, Emma was surrounded by police officers and detectives. A case that had been cold for over 2 decades was suddenly, impossibly, alive again. The Georgia Bureau of Investigation was contacted. Detective Diana Moss, who had retired but still kept in touch with the department, got a call from her former partner. "Diana," he said, "you are not going to believe this. We think we found Lily Moore. She is alive." Moss, who had spent years working the case, who had never fully been able to let it go, felt her knees go weak. She immediately got in her car and started the drive to North Carolina, unable to stay away from the case she had poured so much of her life into. DNA testing was the next step. Emma provided a sample, which was rushed to a laboratory for comparison. The FBI still had DNA from items that had belonged to Lily Moore, collected during the initial investigation. They also reached out to David and Sarah Moore to request samples for comparison, which would provide the most definitive proof. The call to the Moore family came late at night, 23 years and several months after Lily had disappeared. Sarah was the one who answered the phone. She had been unable to sleep, a chronic problem she had dealt with for over 2 decades. The FBI agent explained carefully that a young woman in North Carolina believed she might be Lily, that the circumstances of her case were compelling, but that DNA confirmation would be needed. Sarah could not speak. She made a sound that was half sob, half gasp. David, hearing the noise, came running from the bedroom. "What is it? What is wrong?" he asked, immediately fearing bad news. Sarah handed him the phone, unable to form words. After David hung up, he and Sarah clung to each other, both crying, both afraid to believe what they had just been told. They called Marcus, waking him at his flat. Marcus, who had been 9 when his sister disappeared and was now 32, listened to his father's shaking voice deliver the incredible news. "I am coming home," Marcus said immediately. "I will be there in an hour." The Moore family spent that night in their living room, unable to sleep, afraid that if they closed their eyes, this might turn out to be a dream. The DNA results came back faster than expected, rushed through with priority status due to the nature of the case. Emma Wilson was definitively, conclusively Lily Moore. The genetic markers matched perfectly with samples from the Moore parents. There was no doubt. After 23 years, the cold case of Lily Moore's disappearance had been solved. The missing girl had been found alive. The first meeting between Lily and her biological family was arranged carefully by therapists and law enforcement, everyone aware of how delicate and emotional this reunion would be. It took place in a private room at the FBI office in Atlanta, a neutral space where both parties could meet without the pressure of media attention or public scrutiny. Sarah, David, and Marcus arrived early, all 3 looking nervous and anxious. They had been offered counseling to prepare them for this moment, to help them understand that Lily had no memories of them, that she had lived an entire life as someone else, that this reunion was the beginning of a long and difficult process, rather than an instant restoration of their family. When Lily was brought into the room, there was a moment of profound silence as everyone took in the sight of each other. Sarah made a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and a sob. This young woman looked so much like the little girl they had lost, but aged, transformed into an adult stranger. Lily had her mother's eyes, her father's nose, features that marked her unmistakably as their daughter. But she also looked weary and overwhelmed, standing there uncertain of what to do or say. "Lily," Sarah said, taking a tentative step forward. Then she stopped, unsure if it was acceptable to approach, if physical contact would be welcome. Lily looked at this woman who was her mother, a person she had no memory of, but who had somehow always been there in the back of her mind. The kind eyes from her fragment memories. "I do not remember you," Lily said, and her voice cracked. "I am sorry. I do not remember any of this." Sarah shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "That is all right," she said. "That is all right, sweetheart. You were so young. We do not expect you to remember. We are just so grateful you are alive." Marcus stared at his sister, whom he had mourned for more than half his life. "You are really here," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "All these years, you were alive." They spent the next 2 hours talking, crying, sharing stories. The Moore parents told Lily about her childhood, showed her photos they had brought, described her personality as a 6-year-old. Lily listened, looking at pictures of a little girl who was supposedly her, feeling like she was learning about a character in a story, rather than her own past. It was not a fairy tale ending. It was messy and complicated and painful. But it was a beginning. As investigators dug into Robert's background, a tragic picture emerged. Robert had been married briefly in his 20s. His wife had been expecting their first child, and they had been eagerly awaiting the arrival. But she had passed away in childbirth, along with the baby. It was a devastating loss that Robert had never recovered from. He had become increasingly isolated and unstable in the years that followed. By 1991, he was living alone, working odd jobs, clearly struggling with untreated mental health issues and grief. The theory that emerged was that Robert had seen Lily walking home from school and, in his disturbed state, had seen an opportunity to fill the void left by his lost family. It had not been carefully planned. He had simply acted on impulse, calling to the child, perhaps saying he knew her parents, getting her into his car before anyone noticed. He had driven straight out of Georgia, stopping only for petrol and food, making it several states away before the manhunt had even properly begun. His complete lack of criminal record, his anonymity, and his willingness to keep moving had allowed him to disappear with Lily into a new life. In the years that followed, Robert had apparently convinced himself that he had saved Lily somehow, that he was providing her with a better life, that she belonged with him. The isolation and homeschooling had been ways to avoid detection, but also to maintain the fantasy he had created. While Robert was barely conscious in his hospital bed, officers read him his rights and placed him under arrest for abduction. Even knowing he would likely never stand trial due to his condition, the gesture was important. Robert Wilson passed away just 2 weeks after Lily's identity was confirmed. His final confession, prompted by disease-induced confusion and guilt, had finally allowed the truth to emerge. The weeks and months that followed were difficult for everyone involved. Lily moved back to Georgia, though she got her own flat rather than moving in with her parents. She needed space to process everything, to figure out who she was now that her entire identity had been upended. She started intensive therapy, working through the trauma of learning she had been taken, of losing the father figure she had known, of trying to build relationships with a family that felt like strangers. She struggled with anger at Robert for what he had done, but also with grief over his passing. Sarah and David tried to give Lily space, while also desperately wanting to make up for lost time. They had to learn how to be parents to an adult daughter they did not know, to respect her autonomy while also wanting to protect and nurture her. Marcus became perhaps Lily's strongest connection to her biological family. He did not pressure her, did not expect her to instantly feel like his sister again. Instead, he approached their relationship with patience and humor, gradually building a genuine friendship that eventually deepened into a sibling bond. Lily legally changed her name back to Lily Moore, though she sometimes felt like neither Lily nor Emma fully captured who she was. She was something in between. A person shaped by 2 different lives, by both her stolen years and her reclaimed identity. She got her GED, having been homeschooled with an uneven curriculum. She enrolled in community college, discovering a love for art that had been suppressed during her years with Robert. She slowly built a life for herself, one that acknowledged both her past and her future. The Moore family attended counseling together, working through the complex emotions of their situation. There was joy at having Lily back, but also grief for all the lost years. There was gratitude that she was alive, but anger at what had been done to her. It was not easy. There were setbacks and difficult days. But gradually, slowly, they began to heal. Years after her recovery, Lily sat for an interview with a journalist writing about cold cases solved through modern methods and determination. In that interview, she reflected on what her experience had taught her. "I lost 23 years of my life," she said. "I lost my childhood, my family, my identity. Robert took all of that from me, and I can never get it back. But I also survived. I found my way back to my family eventually, and while the scars will always be there, I am learning how to build a life that honors both the child I was and the person I have become. I am Lily Moore, and I am still here." The case of Lily Moore became a landmark in discussions about missing children cases and the importance of never giving up on cold cases. It demonstrated the value of maintaining databases, of keeping case files active even decades after a disappearance, of the role that determination and technology can play in solving old mysteries. For the thousands of families still waiting for answers about their own missing loved ones, Lily's story offered something precious: hope. It proved that even after decades, even when all leads seemed exhausted, resolution was still possible. Missing did not always mean gone forever. Sometimes the lost could be found. Sometimes families could be reunited. Sometimes, against all odds, there could be a second chance. Detective Diana Moss kept a photo on her desk of the day Lily was reunited with her family. In it, Sarah and Lily are embracing, both in tears, surrounded by David and Marcus. It served as a reminder of why she had become a police officer in the first place. Of the real human impact behind every case file, of the importance of persistence and dedication. Some cold cases do not end with a grave. They end with a heartbeat, with a reunion, with a second chance at life. Lily Moore's story is one of those rare and precious cases, and while the scars of what she endured will never fully heal, she survived. She found her way home. And in the end, that is what matters. If you have been with us through this entire journey, thank you for listening to Lily's story. If this case touched you, or if you believe in never giving up on the missing, please take a moment to hit that like button. Subscribe to Dark Crime Uncovered for more true crime stories. And share this video with someone who needs to hear a story of hope and perseverance. Drop a comment below and let me know your thoughts on this remarkable case. What part stayed with you the most? And if you or someone you know has information about any missing person, please do not hesitate to contact law enforcement. Your tip, no matter how small it might seem, could be the key to bringing someone home. Until next time, stay safe out there.